Hello, Chicago and beyond. I'm Tracy D. Hall, and I have the great privilege of serving as the host and co-executive producer of the CAN TV original docuseries, The Audit: Black Women in Leadership Post George Floyd. The studio audience and I just shared the experience of screening the first chapter of the docuseries. And perhaps, like me, you're having a fairly strong reaction to the themes and issues amplified in the audit, and that's perfectly fine and to be expected. There are no easy answers to the issues raised, but if we are to make progress, we must move forward together, creating safe and brave spaces for the uncomfortable but critically important conversations like the one we are about to have over the course of the next hour. Joining me in conversation and community are some of the indomitable Black women leaders featured in the docuseries, along with one individual who has proven himself to be a true ally. Won't you please help me welcome Sharon Bush, President, Grand Victoria Foundation; Watis Gathings, co-founder, Just Act Partners; Nicole Robinson, CEO, YWCA of Metropolitan Chicago; Mary Morton, President, the Morton Group; and Matt Johansson, co-founder, Just Act Partners. Welcome, everyone. Let's dive right in. So I want you to all think about this for a moment. In the form of a newspaper front page headline, what is the current state of Black women leaders in the American workplace?
Girl, you in danger.
Girl, you're in danger. Say a little bit more, Mary.
It's always been difficult for Black women. I'm reminded of Malcolm X's quote about Black women: the most disrespected, the most unprotected, the most neglected person in America is the Black woman. And that has never been truer.
Nicole, you were just about to jump out the gate as well. Can you follow up?
Sure, I just add Black women resilient, from surviving to thriving. And I think that that does characterize and support what Mary says. And also from the Middle Passage to Jim Crow to where we are today. I will bet on a Black woman anytime. Black women have faced obstacles throughout history. We don't need to face them, but we face them and we reinvent ourselves and change it. But unfortunately, that is the state of where we've been.
So as a follow-up, I wanted to ask about this swift and vocal effort on the part of businesses to embrace Black leaders, particularly Black women leaders, in the months after George Floyd's murder, an effort that seemed to come to a screeching halt in the years since. Why weren't those efforts lasting? Why weren't they sticky?
I would say if so much of a part of it was hiring for the optics, right? The optics to meet the moment at the time, then it worked for the moment, the literal moment. But what, like I've seen among colleagues who weren't as lucky as me to stay in their roles during that period, is if you're hiring and understanding the essence of like what a Black woman brings into leadership, that's a completely different thing. One of the things that we know, right, is that in order for us to have survived like all the different ways that we've been treated, attacked over decades, generations, is we have to disrupt in order to get the world that we want to see, right? So if we are disrupting in a way that suits us, then like how does that feel to others? Is that a threat to like what people's comfort is, right? Or those sorts of things. So when we get into a spot, a leadership spot, and we begin to see truths, tell truths, switch them up, make the changes, that's a lot of discomfort for people. And then that discomfort reminds them of something that they might be losing, right? So then that it's not a good recipe for the longevity, the sustaining, if people are not comfortable with disruption, which is something that we're naturally comfortable with because that is how we thrive and survive in places.
Letice, you want to add onto that?
Yeah, I would add that your commentary about disruption really just resonated with me. I think that studies show that Black women oftentimes sit in roles a lot longer than most demographics, meaning when we take on our new assignment, we were already underemployed, so our performance and our speed out the gate is a lot stronger. Our way of understanding, our way of delivering looks different, even at a curve that's different than our counterparts. And so when you talk about disruption, it's hard for us as Black women to be performative. If we're in a role, we're gonna take that job very, very serious, and we're doing the things that organizations are committing to and saying that they're gonna do. I also think that Black women oftentimes get stuck with, and it's our privilege, work that oftentimes requires systems to change in order for them to be effective. And system change does not come without disruption. A lot of people are very comfortable with the way they've always done things, but also this mentality of they want us to do good as Black women, but never better than them. And so once we have that swagger and that confidence, and the more we grow into our roles, the more authentic we're able to be. And they don't always understand what they're signing up for. And I think that is the biggest challenge, is when they get the full experience of who we are as individuals. Once we take off our blinders and become more comfortable and build effective teams, it becomes an issue because they start to see that trend. And again, there's this ceiling they have to push us to in order for them to feel comfortable.
Yeah, one build on that, Tracy. I spent 19 years in corporate America prior to joining the nonprofit industry, and my observation as well is that Black women and Black people generally are always given the toughest assignments. So you imagine 2020, a global pandemic that no one has ever seen before, a financial crisis when the employee-employer contract is being renegotiated completely. Never happened before in this way. So you hire Black women when the ship is sinking. It is so Black women often get appointed to situations that are essentially the Titanic is going down, and they're saying unleash your Black girl magic right now. So it's impossible. Claudine Gay, Roz Brewer at Walgreens. Walgreens just got acquired by private equity. They were going down when she got ascended to the top. So why do we always get those assignments?
I'm Robin Robinson. This week on In Other News, I'll sit in community and conversation with the executive director of this very network, Darius Hillman, a dynamic new leader here at CAN TV. We'll be talking about the power of local news and the need for access for you. His story in his own words. Join the conversation on CAN TV Cable Channel 19 or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN TV Plus app. Hyperlocal news and critical analysis. Experience the power of community television.
Hi, I'm Ashley Munson, inviting you to join me and my Chief of Staff, Justin James, and the band with no name for Munson Tonight. Each month, we'll explore political news to make it understandable and relevant for everyday citizens. Even if you don't think you're interested in politics, politics is interested in you. Join the conversation this month on CAN TV Cable Channel 19. Hyperlocal news and public affairs. Experience the power of community television.
I'm Andy Zopp, the host of Chicago Newsroom 2.0. Every week, we gather for insightful conversations with local journalists and community leaders as we discuss the news of the day and how it impacts the lives of Chicagoans. Join the conversation on CAN TV Cable Channel 19 or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN TV Plus app. Hyperlocal news and critical analysis. Experience the power of community television.
For more than 40 years, CAN TV has been Chicago's voice, your voice. We've shared your stories, amplified your concerns, and celebrated your triumphs. Now we want to hear from you. What programs matter most? What issues should we cover? How can we better serve your community? Visit cantv.org/feedback today. CAN TV. Experience the power of community television.
So I want to ask you about that, and I think that this conversation is moving in a direction that will resonate with many of us who have worked in organizations and seen I would say a kind of change, as you suggest, Nicole, that we haven't seen before, and also where we're thinking in different ways about not only what's required about leadership, but the vulnerability of people in leadership. And in her writing on the case system, Isabel Wilkerson sort of gets at this sort of pecking order, right? And I wanted to ask you about your own experience, because there is a lot of transparency that's expected of leaders. And at the same time, as we know, a lot of leaders aren't held to the same standards, depending on what they look like. And certainly, as we hear a lot of conversation about a meritocracy, a lot of times is anything but a meritocracy. And so, there is a lot of optics in terms of who's seen as a credible and legitimate leader, and who is seen as a leader who comes in to sort of pinch hit, but isn't welcomed after that. And so I wanted to ask you about your own experience. So can someone describe an experience in your career where you have felt the intersection of race and gender, where it played a factor, either good or bad, and how did you have to adjust based on that experience? So we're talking about the intersections here of race and gender in your own work and leadership experience.
I think certainly in my work, because we work across the country, I've served as executive directors and CEOs and interim EDs, and there's an expectation that you're going to save the day. And you're going to do it in a way that is amenable to how they have worked in the past. And so in relation to some of the other earlier comments, when you are doing something that is different, it is absolutely effective, but it is different than what they expected, and you have this positive outcome, there's absolute pushback because they want you to show up in a particular way. And because we do executive search, these are stories I hear from women all the time. They went into a role, they were absolutely not just qualified for it, we are generally overqualified for everything that we do, yet they have been met with a lot of hostility and resistance because of the vulnerability that they are sometimes bringing with them, but because they are willing to dig deep. They're willing to look at systems change, and they're willing to take on the hard work. So they've hired you, they've asked you to come in and do this particular role. And I was in another state in an interim role, and working in an organization that really led with racial equity. Yet, when I was in the role and really tried to make some procedural changes in the organization that were clearly needed, I was met with a lot of resistance. They really said one thing, but did another. And we know that many people who came into roles, many women, many black women who came into roles in 21 and 22 weren't in those roles long, particularly not only just the executive leader, but anyone who came in an equity role, chief equity officer, chief diversity officer, because the work was too hard for the organization. It was not what they expected, it was too hard, and the person was likely not getting the support they needed.
Matt, I want to bring you into this conversation, because I think if you're watching this either online or on television, you see Matt here amongst these leaders, and I think it's really important that you're here because we are at a place, as Mary is suggesting, we're at a place where there are people saying, I'm tired of DEI. That is antithetical to business productivity. What does it mean in terms of performance? Or I'm sick of talking about it, or it's woke, and so I want to ask you, why is it important at the same time that people want to stop talking about race, and not everyone, certainly, but we are seeing a lot of corporations roll back their DEI efforts. We're seeing a country where it has become sort of certain kinds of words and even books about those words and histories are considered to be contraband. We are seeing the outlawing of particular areas of language. So at this time when so many people want to, I would say, sweep the conversation about race under the rug, for you, why is it important that we talk about it?
Yeah. When I'm asked that, it's easy, right? When race actually doesn't matter, when we look at outcomes, when we look at, especially if we're talking about the workplace, let's talk about hiring, let's talk about promotions, let's talk about pay. When race actually doesn't matter, we can stop talking about it, right? So if you want to stop talking about it now, to me, you're ignoring the facts. You're ignoring the facts that we live in an inequitable system, and if we don't talk about it, nothing will ever change, right? The way DEI has been weaponized now, and this DEI was never meant to elevate unqualified, right? The fact that has now become synonymous, a DEI hire, right? I'm going to say that is an unqualified person. It was never that. It was always about making sure that the most qualified person of color, black woman, got promoted over a white man, a less qualified white man.
So I want to go to this, back to this idea of like thinking about fact, and what's factual about this is that, there are so many studies that show that managers, Black managers, managers of color tend to hire the most diverse teams. Yes. And that diverse teams tend to function, tend to produce at a higher level than homogenous teams. And so I think, as we're talking about this, we really want to sort of assert that those of you listening at home can find all of the data and information that you need to corroborate, I think, what we're saying here. So I want to ask you all, what would you say to those that feel that Black people are leading in this conversation about last hired and first fired, being sort of saddled with organizations, that might be in a downward spiral? What would you say to people who are saying that's playing the race card? And why is it important at this particular moment when we see people talking about very widely that DEI is too political? Why do you think it's important for us to have sustained conversations about race? Not just performative conversations about race.
Race is still the primary indicator of someone's success in this country, period. And so we have to keep talking about it. And it's really important, I think, I just, in terms of definitions, DEI has not necessarily been about race. And I think it's really interesting how that's been married together. We, in the past, could do an entire DEI session and never talk about race.
Yes.
So we've made a commitment, however, in this time, in this moment, that we will talk about race no matter what. And that is the only way we can continue to do work around equity and around diversity, around inclusion. We must talk about race. We just simply cannot fall into the trap, if you will, of believing that it's been weaponized, DEI has been weaponized, and that we're not going to bring up race. We must do it. And so we're actually committed to it in a way that is even stronger than we were committed to it before.
I think,
yes, go ahead, Sharon.
The moment that we're in right now is one of the most highly racialized moments, conversations that I've had in my lifetime. So I'm after the civil rights generation, right? We're just not we're wanting to erase the words of Black or whatever other kinds. But this is a highly racialized discussion that is sitting white people at the top. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about when we say things or compare things to white males, we're not saying that is a highly racialized way of seeing the world, designing the world, right? So we're talking about race now. The fact, I was in a meeting yesterday and we're all hearing from lawyers about what we can do and what we cannot do, or how to be robust in the work that that we've spent decades building and trying to do. And the first actions that we saw at the beginning of the year were calling out race. It isn't people of color who are bringing up that conversation as fiercely as it's happening right now. So if we don't, and we need to think about that in the context of the rapidly shifting demographics of the country, That is why we have to keep talking about it, because that is why we're seeing the ferocity of what is happening now, right? Because of those changes. So until we figure out how to actually talk about race in the most productive way, in a reparative way, then we're going to continue to have this fierceness. And I don't know like what how it will be concluded, whether it will be a violent way, right, or not. And these might seem like really alarmist ways of talking, but this is a really alarmist moment that we find ourselves in that is completely racialized.
Yeah.
You are, and one bill, I just got to say, it's also about power.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, because again, the foundation of all of this is money and power, and race and gender are used as tools to maintain power. Right. So if you're you're afraid, you're rooted in your fear about race, then yeah, it might seem convenient to criticize anything that's positively happening for people of color and feel that it's a takeaway. It is not a zero-sum game. And we still operate in a society where it's zero-sum, right? And there's not enough for each other. So until we have collective care, until we want the same things for each other, we will use race and gender as a tool.
And I love that, and I think it's, back to your original question, why do we have to keep talking about it? Is because the conversation is based in fear and fragility, right? We have to keep talking about it. It's not based on fact, it's not based on logic, it's not based on what is even, in the workplace, good business.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the quandary is that there is, in some ways, sort of this fact versus fiction, and fiction continues to win. Even when we have this conversation about DEI, when we do the numbers, we know that white people have been the primary beneficiaries of DEI efforts. And yet, at the same time, there is a lot of, so whereas it's seen or talked about, having this conversation is about playing the race card, the reality in some cases is that it can be seen as race baiting. Because the conversation is not grounded in fact and is not grounded in numbers. So that leads me to kind of thinking about media and advertising. What role do you think that media and advertising play in shaping opinions of Black women? What do you think is missing from the narrative of the portrayal about or of Black women?
You know, I think that when I think about the role of media, for me, certainly, I think it puts Black women on the defense. I think that it impacts the way you show up day one. A lot of folks that we're talking about, especially those in power, don't technically have proximate experience with Black women that they can view as a daughter or a spouse or someone in their close connected circle. And so the media is the only thing that shaped their experiences. I can tell you the opposite. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and not until I moved to Arizona was I ever in a non-majority Black environment. And just having to interact in that space as a young 15-year-old, it was very clear that people already had preconceived notions about me when I was probably one of the only African-American kids in the school. And I think for that, it makes you assimilate in some ways. It makes you change the DNA that you are. And then once you have that awakening as an individual, then you reinforce whatever stereotypes they already believe. And so I do think media has a way of portraying African-American women in a certain way, but they don't talk about the aspects. I can read a news headline and tell you what the race of the individual is. I can read it. It'll be, single mother versus strong mother. It just a different in dialect when they talk about us versus themselves. And I think that they oftentimes weaponize our life experiences that are no choice or no fault of our own. And they declare war on Black women versus the systems that impact Black women. And that's a challenge.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts?
I would just add that an example that comes to mind is around the time right after George Floyd was murdered and the protests were going on, many of the networks that had previously had panels that would be all white men. And we wonder, why don't they have any people of color? Why don't they have anyone Black on this panel? Suddenly found people, right? They found people who were experts, who looked different than everyone else. And so that, of course, could have been happening, but it was not until they felt some push to do it. And so all of the experts, all of the vendors, all the folks who would come on and, run through products, all those folks were generally white. And in the last number of years, certainly around the time that of the racial protests were happening, did we see that change. And that's because they were feeling the pressure. They were hearing from people who were watching, and they were saying, why don't we see someone who looks like us? It's not as though we're not participating in this. It's not as though we're not buying those products. And they changed. And so it has never been that they couldn't have done it. They just didn't want to do it.
Funding for The Audit, Black Women in Leadership, Post-George Floyd, is brought to you in part by Grand Victoria Foundation and generous Chicagoans like you.
Grand Victoria Foundation believes in a future where racial justice isn't just an idea, it's reality, where Black communities across Illinois have the power, resources, and opportunities needed to thrive. We support the wisdom, leadership, and work of those most impacted by the systems we look to change, trusting their ability to build power and change narratives. When all communities have the resources and support they need, all Illinoisans can thrive, ensuring equity in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is collective liberation. This is the work of Grand Victoria Foundation.
Hi, I'm Bianca Cotton. Join me Mondays at 7 p.m. as I sit in conversation with incredible, dynamic, and complex Chicagoans who peel back the layers, living lessons, the joy, and the pain behind their confident smiles. Join the conversation Mondays at 7 p.m. on CAN-TV Cable Channel 19 and streaming on cantv.org and CAN-TV Plus app.
CAN-TV is the lens through which Chicago's stories are told, harnessing the unifying power of community television. With CAN-TV On Demand, immerse yourself in the richness of our city through exclusive stories and programs tailored just for you, connecting you to the heartbeats of our streets, the voices of our people, and the spirit that makes Chicago unique. Discover the strength of your community on CAN-TV On Demand.
And we have to add that it was a global push.
Absolutely.
Right? So when we think about, especially when we think about what came after George Floyd's murder, and we think about the Black Lives Matter movement, what really stood out for me is that it was a global movement. It was the world saying that we have these baseline expectations of what inclusion looks like. And it wasn't just people in the US, it was a whole world saying, we want to see the full America represented. And I think that that's really important for us to remember, because I think in this particular moment, when we are truly in a global economy, there's going to be deep repercussions, continued repercussions, financial and otherwise, for the rollback of DEI, or for the wholesale dismissal of DEI as a construct that can move us towards inclusion. But I wanted to ask, in this age of political tension, when we think about the moment that we are in right now, especially when we think about the courts and lawmakers and policymakers, what should we be demanding to help secure our progress as not just Black women, but our progress as a people in general?
I think the thing she just touched on and what stands out to me is the idea of demanding things from power, right? Power's not going to give us anything unless we demand it and ask for it. And I do think, I'm a younger person, and so for me, just thinking about my generation, the murder of George Floyd was one of the most powerful movements I had ever experienced, and knew it gave me language, it helped me understand how to demand things, it helped me understand what it means to organize. I mean, if you ask places like Target right now, they've lost $1 billion as a result of the Black community demanding some attention and conversations. That's not a conversation we would have gotten with the Target CEO had it not been an impact to the bottom line. And I do think when we talk about lawmakers and others, they're not incentivized to really move on our behalf until we demand something. We do that with our spending. We do that with what we watch and what we consume as consumers. We do that in how we support each other. We do that in how we support Black businesses. I think we have to understand, what do they care about? And it's power and money. And when we shift our focus I think that's when we start to see real change versus expecting us to just ask a lawmaker. We don't have the representation we need there either. Right. And we just saw that play out on the national stage when 92% of women voted for, black women I should say, let me make that clear, voted for the likes of Madam Harris. I mean, we should have been able to make that demand, but unfortunately we're just not there yet.
Yes, 92% of black women, 85% of black men.
It's not just what I would say, it's what are we demanding of the electorate versus the electeds. So people have to get up and vote.
That's right.
So a lot of this conversation that we've seen, a lot of this stuff started bubbling up at the local levels, right? We saw all of the stories about local school councils and all of that. And the elections that you see at the local levels, data will tell you how close those elections are and how low the turnout is, right? So if we're not demanding of the electorate to say, we have all of these ways that we will continue, that we can cast our vote, make a difference, then we will continue to have what we have. Electeds will be transactional and all of the things. The system is designed for them to behave that way. Sometimes there's nothing wrong with that, and at other times that's exactly the thing that we don't need. If we're in a moment right now where the transactions are not gonna get us the structural change that we know we need because we're in like a huge war right now, then I would shift like that question back onto people, right? So do we need like to continue to push for lots of different ways to vote so that we can include as many people as possible at all levels of how it is that we can vote so that we can see the right kinds of ways of change or visions for like what kind of country or city or town that we want to have be. So we can figure out whether we want to put all of our faith in elected officials. Right now we see that their poll numbers are super low, right? No one has confidence in them. I think people do have confidence in people,
yes,
right? So I would shift that a little.
Yeah, does anyone want to add on to that? This notion of progress and thinking about traditional progress, when we think about voters and when we think about lawmakers, where do you think that balance lies?
We need an inside game and an outside game. That's what
more.
they had during the Civil Rights Movement, and that's what we need to do now. We need people working inside institutions and continue to advocate for change. So, and that is happening. There are government employees inside the government who are working against this emerging dictatorship that we have, because that is what it is. They are dissecting laws, most recently in government contracts, something that had been in government contracts for decades, the idea that you could not have separate facilities. That is now permissible in a government contract. It is against the law, but we have a group of rule breakers. So at some point, we still have to work inside institutions. We still have to vote. We do have to protest. We have to do it all. Economics, in the streets, because it will become a time where the pain is gonna outweigh how we're feeling paralyzed right now. Because that's what I feel. But that's what this is serious business. Communities will feel pain, all of the communities that we serve, and we are gonna have to stand up and act. And that is voting. I'm optimistic. I think we're gonna get there. We do have to get the Congress, because right now we got the executive branch, the Supreme Court, and the Congress all permitting the breaking of laws. But we got attorneys, legal systems, AGs who are fighting back, and all of those things need to work together. So I don't think it's one thing. We got to fight back every single way.
We need multiple strategies. I can remember when I worked in city government and people thought, you're going to work for the man. Oh my God, and I said, but
we
you
needed you there.
Right, exactly. You want someone with my politics on the inside so you can push from the outside and we can push toward the middle. But we have to be strategic about our actions, and we have to do many things, as you said. It just can't be one strategy.
Yes. Yeah. So I want to take this conversation, I think, Sharon, I want to thank you because I am always thinking about the next generation. I'm always thinking about young people. And so for a minute, I want to take this conversation back. I teach at a university now, and I'm really, once again, I taught for years, but this is a really important time to be talking with and learning from, as well as mentoring young people. But one of the things that I recognize is that we have to be intentional in our conversations with young people, lest they inherit our bias, lest they inherit this sort of willful blindness to segregation. So it has to be intentional conversations, and I certainly speak with a lot of people committed to social justice, committed to inclusion. I speak with a lot of young Black women who ask me, how do you risk being in leadership positions? Don't they wear you down? How do you withstand them? And I also talk to people who in general want to ask, what can I do as a young person to move this country closer to justice, to the justice that I seek? And so I want to ask you that question. What should we be doing? How should we be engaging with young people who are in this moment as well? Many of whom can't vote yet, but are watching our every move. What can we say to them? How can we support them? How can we talk to them about not only voting, but movement building?
I think, so I'm a mother of 3 daughters. And today is my middle daughter's birthday. She is 27 years old today.
Congratulations.
And thank you so much. I think what I learned from being a mother of adult women is to listen. Young people have a lot of ideas, and this is another thing that the data plays out, right? When things are trendy, they start first with young people first, often, right? And then others catch on. One of the things, we're talking a little bit about a political moment or the political environment. And a lot of things that you hear, we've been talking about this within our organization some, is the two-party system is not the future of what is going to get us to these different changes. They have a lot of challenges to the way that democracy and civic participation work. How will that extend into corporate environments? How will that extend into other environments? It's a really interesting thing to watch, right? So I have to say I get a lot, I've had some challenging moments over the last few years in leadership. And my oldest daughter, she has the temperament, she has the rhetoric, that has helped me actually be a much better, more gracious leader in this moment, and ideas for how things can be different and better. So I think the talking has to be just as much of us being in that position of listening to them, and then how might we figure out what the partnership looks like across these generations. So they're not kicking us to the curb, right? Because we have our roles to play, and to let all of this, to me, you see this bubbling up of these wonderful sensibilities and righteousness that we need, because we're entering into a completely new era of what it means to think about civil rights, workplaces, the shifts in workplaces. These are big, huge structural shifts. I think these young people, they've already figured it out. They just need the opportunities to test their ideas, right?
To test in a safe space too. Matt, I wanted to ask you, what are you saying to the young people in your life? What are you saying to the young people in your family about allyship and about a commitment to inclusion and racial justice?
Yeah. My kids are about the same age as yours, so we have 4 kids, 27 to 35, and 2 grandsons. And yeah, I love your answer, Sharon. There's this idea of the hopelessness that's there and kind of the disillusionment that's there. is real, right? And so to accept that and to not, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, all that kind of stuff, is so important. And then I don't know that I do a lot of talking about it. I just try to do a lot of modeling with it, right? So as Watisa and I work together, right? She's the boss, right? She's the managing director. So this old man and a young black woman, right? We want to model in our work, kind of the advocacy that needs to exist in the world, and I hope they see that.
Yeah. Yes, they do.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, there is so much more, I think, to say, but I want to bring this back to the audit, this idea of the scorecard, right? And, we're talking about a political moment, but certainly there's an economic moment. One of the things that, I followed, I remember Deutsche Bank, I think it was September of 2020, they were taking sort of the economic temperature of where we were in this period of long COVID now, right? And one of the things that they saw, they weren't looking for this, but one of the conclusions that they made is that particularly black people would be facing an economic abyss if things were to continue on the path that they were. What they saw is that we were moving to a space where we would have AI escalating, artificial intelligence at the level that it is, that we would have machine learning, that we would have really changes in industry that would mean that people who were at the service level or at the blue collar level of the workforce would find a lot of their jobs taken away by machines. And also that we would be in places, especially as people left the traditional sort of work clusters and moved to working at home, that many of the service jobs would go away. And certainly you can't be in a large or mid-sized city without seeing the number of vacancies downtown, even as we are coming back from COVID. So we do know that the workplace has changed, and we also know that economically, people of color, and particularly black people, are worse off than they were before the pandemic. And we also know that there is an increasing number of households that are headed by black women. So again, when we think about that intersection of race and gender, and when we think about the audit or America's scorecard, we are also talking about a situation, a racialized situation, a classed situation that will impact our communities and is impacting our communities generationally and really in many cases for the long term. So as we get ready to close, I wanted to sort of ask you for your prescription. We're getting at it now, but I wanted to ask each of you, what should we be doing in the next 1 to 3 years to not only deal with the debate around race and black women's leadership, but just to deal with the racialized and classed inequities that all of us are facing in the U.S.?
I think we really do have to listen to young people. I want to pick up on what Sharon was saying. Young people are the only group of folks that we make legislation for and about, that we set guidelines for, procedures, and they often, generally, are not included in those conversations. We do that on a regular basis. I can't tell you the number of times when I've been showing a film that focused on young people where I had to insist that they put young people on the panel or say I won't come. We must listen to young people. They do have many of the answers. They do have a different way of looking at this work, and I am really I'm leaning into what they have to say. Yeah.
I'd echo that. I have a 13-year-old brother that I get the good fortune of recapping school with every day and talking to and being his buddy. But I get so hopeful when I talk to him. Like his perspective on life, his conviction about what's right and wrong, his willingness to advocate for other people, his desire to pick the least skilled team when they're playing pickup ball on the playground, and all of his buddies not understanding why he didn't pick someone that was better in caliber, just represents that, A, what we're modeling for him, but also I think that I recognize the world that we are creating is what he's going to inherit. I mean, he has to be informed, he has to understand, and he has to know. And oftentimes, while I didn't get to sit around the table with the leader, I got to sit around the table with a mom, a powerful mom that taught me a lot of good values, but he gets a different experience, right? He gets to have a front row seat to my life and what I stand for and what I get to do. And I do think that he drives that. And so my commitment over the next few years is really to anchor on our young people. I've been spending a lot more time in our elementary schools. And it's interesting, like when you see a preschooler and you watch them ascend to 8th grade, and year after you just watch the hope diminish. I can walk through any elementary school on the south and west sides and see these vibrant 3 and 4 year olds, but by the time you get to 8th grade, there's a gap in their hope. And we got to figure out a way how to restore that gap, because if not, the world that they're going to inherit, they won't be able to handle or have the tools to reassess it. And I'm concerned that that's not our attention. We can fight up here as adults all day long, but we got to go see about our kids and make sure that they're on the right path going forward.
We also have to listen, not just listen to them, but invest in them. And I have to be the historian again, but I'm currently just finished the memoir of George Johnson, the founder of Johnson Products, part of the Great Migration, came from the South and created the first business to be traded on the stock exchange, black hair care products. And his value set as an entrepreneur was amazing. And he fueled so much of the civil rights movement. He helped elect Harold Washington. When Jesse Jackson started out as an organizer, he didn't have any money. His family didn't have a place to stay. And George Johnson, along with other businessmen, got him an apartment. They helped fuel the movement. And I feel like to some extent, as we become more institutionalized to what it means to live in America and be a consumer and become an individual, we've stepped away from what it is about collective care. So if we care about a movement, if we want to drive change and we want to have an inside and an outside game, those of us in the inside got to fund and fuel the outside game, right? And that's how they work together. Richard Hunt, he helped create him as an artist. I could go on and on with the list of people. Soul Train, Don Cornelius had no money when Soul Train first aired, and George Johnson funded the whole project, gave him 50% equity in it, and then ultimately gave him the whole thing with nothing in exchange. And his value is that I'm gonna fuel and help other people rise. And if we wanna change the outcomes for Black people, we have to embrace that. So I feel like listen to the young people, invest in them, and we still have to remember the history, because if we don't reflect in the history, we are going to make the mistakes of the past, because that's how this dictatorship is operating. They know that people don't know what happened in the past. Yeah. They don't know that these rights were in place. People don't even know they're being taken away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a concerted effort, right?
Yes, exactly.
To make sure that people never know. And also, an anti-intellectualism, right? Mm-hmm. That is, even while we know that the majority of millionaires in this country have bachelor's degrees and are sending their children off to higher education, so there's a little bit of a propaganda, right, that's happening, saying, what's good for me is not good for you. You don't need what I have. But let's continue this line in thinking about the next generation. And I want to just add a bit, thinking about the audit, our responsibility to young Black women.
Mm-hmm. I think just to maybe pick up on a little bit of the thread, but it's something that I've been talking to others about. We're all of a certain generation up here, maybe with the exception of you. He calls you a young person. And what we've done is we've had an opportunity to build, to gain influence and power in the positions that we're in. So to Nicole's point, part of what we need to do is we earned that, and now we do pass and share that to the ones who are coming behind us with the ideas, right? So we share that currency and capital with them so that they can make the moves. The other thing I think that we should be thinking about is we should be examining, leaning into, and aggregating our own power. So we started with that, and we should be looking at that across all these ways: economic power, political power, civic power, social power, we see just what the word of mouth has done to Target.
Yeah.
Folks are now buying Teslas, whatever, right? So we see like when we aggregate like the people power of things in these different sectors, it takes hold, it makes a difference. Pain looks different, it's distributed differently so that we can have a different outcome, right? So this examination of like what that, because we have it. I believe that we have it. We just have to figure out the ways to corral that, believe in it, and then exercise it.
That's a perfect, please.
Yeah, so yes, recognize the power, but I think the other thing maybe a little more individualistic, especially in corporate environments, right? We have to say this all the time, we have to stop talking about the readiness, especially of young black women, right, to your question, and start talking about the awareness, the recognition of that readiness, right? And start talking about networks and how do the old white men that have the power today have more proximate experiences and understand what that is, right? And so I hope I do that. I hope other allies will do that more and more. Stop talking about readiness, start talking about awareness, recognition, and those who have opportunity to give it.
Absolutely. And also stop talking about individual readiness and start talking about organizational readiness, right? Because one of the major issues that we've seen when we think about black women's leadership is that oftentimes black women were brought in as the savior for these organizations, but nothing happened to reform these organizations to deal with the systemic bias that existed in these organizations. So thank you so much. Panelists, I can't thank you enough for the gifts of your talent and passion and fearlessness. To help us further process and plan, joining us is a fearless champion of Black abundance and equity, talent, culture, and social impact strategist, Moji Akinde.
Thanks, Tracy. As we can see, in 2020, America was forced to stop and look at itself. The murder of George Floyd was not just another headline. It was a rupture in our collective consciousness. The pandemic slowed us down, forced us to pay attention, and the world witnessed the undeniable truth that many of us had known, that racial and economic injustice is widespread in this country. Companies made economic commitments, and Black professionals, especially Black women, were elevated to leadership positions. And now, we're witnessing a backlash. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is being weaponized. And the very leaders who were once championed are now being blamed for problems they did not create. We are being told we didn't see what we saw. But if 2020 taught us anything, it's that our fates are intertwined. Our employees, consumers, and communities are not separate groups. They are made up of the same people, shaped by diverse identities and life experiences. Our struggles and our futures are deeply connected. Black women have been at the front line of the fight for justice, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. The solutions that Black women fight for, fair wages, better healthcare, stronger communities, they benefit all of us. But we should not be carrying the burden disproportionately. This is a call to action. We need everyone, every race and ethnicity, people with mixed identities and different life experiences, to all recognize that this fight is not just about race. It's about power. It's about justice. It's about the kind of society we're building for our future. We have seen what happens when we all come together, when we demand more and refuse to let history gaslight us into complacency. The cost of doing nothing is far greater than the sacrifice required for change. But the reward is justice, equity, and a future where we all rise and prosper. And that is a fight worth the sacrifice.
Thanks, Moji. These conversations are not easy to have, but they're absolutely necessary if we are, as a community, a city, a state, and a country to move forward and find our way together in unlearning deeply rooted and long-held beliefs about race in this country. Thank you sincerely to our panelists and our in-studio audience for the intentional act of creating a brave and safe space for these conversations. Listening to understand, not simply to disagree or to judge. The work continues on our collective journey to achievement of that more perfect union. Until we meet again, Chicago, be well.